Yeah, I think authenticity is really important, and like the relationships you build with reporters really can come back around later and have amazing results. Sometimes you need to see it to believe it, and now that client is like all for relationship building conversations.
It's episode 6 for us of the show, which is ironic because 6 Eastern is represented on the show. My friend Emilie Gerber, she is the founder of 6 Eastern. And Emily started her career on the agency side of PR comms before going in house at Box and Uber. And in 2019, she started 6 Eastern, a PR agency for startups, venture firms, and technology brands. And what I've observed is in leading marketing teams is that comms is an important, always been kind of a critical part of the marketing mix. But now in the intelligence age, as we kind of step into this next chapter, it becomes critical, existential. Name your kind of big adjective, and we're going to spend our conversation today unpacking why. So, without further ado, let me welcome to the stage Emily.
Hello.
How's it going?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing good. Good to see you. Thanks so much for joining.
Of course. Very excited for this conversation.
I am too. I'm excited to learn from you. Candidly, we had the good fortune at Audience Plus to work with you and the Six Eastern team, and I think as just I'm thinking about the kind of learning about a topic I know candidly not a whole lot about. I couldn't think of anyone better and more kind of perfect to have on the show. So thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us.
Of course. I appreciate that.
So, would love to start with just kind of a window into what PR looked like, what the PR world looked like before AI. How are B2B companies typically thinking about engaging with internal or external kind of PR firms, and what was sort of ultimately driving the use cases for those engagements?
Yeah, I think typically for B2B companies specifically, it usually came down to trying to build trust and credibility. Like PR is never going to be something that's driving direct leads for your B2B business, like in a way that you can necessarily measure. However, like if you do have an SDR going out and DMing a bunch of prospects, having that third party validation that they can share and not just your own link to a website, I think goes a really long way. And there's a sense of credibility that it lends to your business. Same goes for hiring or finding new investors. So I think it's kind of looked at as a stamp of approval that your business can achieve, especially if you're an early stage startup. I think that's all the more
Mm,
important. You're new, there might not be much about you online. You have your website and your blog, both very important tools, but that alone, you need to have more, you need to have kind of the next level. You need to have more than that. So for most of our clients, I think that's traditionally what they've been looking for. In many ways, that's still what they're looking for. But I think journalists, I mean, their job is to be a trusted, credible source, unbiased. So you can put whatever you'd like on your website, but a journal that's not going to fly with a journalist. You don't get to read the article ahead of time. You don't get to influence how you're positioned. This is a lot of education we do with the founders we work with too, especially if they haven't done PR before. But the journalist's job is to tell the truth. And so that really is, I think, something that you can only get through doing PR.
totally. And I'm curious, just thinking through, you know, I'm setting the stage for PR being sort of now mission critical, kind of at the core of how we go to market. But in the world prior, did you often get pushback again, whether in house or at either of your kind of agency experiences? But was there pushback, and if so, why? Like, what were the things people were
Yeah.
you know hesitant to
Yeah.
jump in with?
All the time. Although I will say some of that would self-select out because on my initial calls with companies, I would explain very clearly what comms can and can't do. And, a company would choose to work with us if they believe in what it can do. But that said, we still get pushback. I think the biggest things come down to the results are too slow. And it's true. It takes, you're not a journalist top priority. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes relationship building. You're not going to necessarily see wins on day one. There's some
Right.
exceptions to that, but I think that the slowness of it can feel challenging. And It has nothing to do with the outputs, like the work that the company or we're doing. It has purely to do with the way that media environment works. It takes time to build credibility. And so I think in startup land, maybe not all companies have the patience for that and don't feel like it's worth the investment with that in mind. Another actually common thing that happens is even when we are successful, it does take up a lot of the spokesperson's time. And if the spokesperson is primarily the founder CEO, you're picking to do a podcast instead of work on like a business critical initiative, and you have to decide if that is worth the time. And for some companies, maybe initially it is, but over time they decide they have to focus on other things. So we've had clients push back for that reason, but then there's ways to solve for that, like expanding the spokesperson bench. And then I think the third thing that comes up most often is it's probably the hardest thing to measure when it comes to a marketing
Yeah.
program.
Totally.
Reports not giving you the they're not gonna send you the number of people that read your article, like, they're not there to help you, really. That's not their primary job. They're not getting paid to
Right.
help you. So it's very opaque in a lot of ways, and you have to, like, a CEO or a CMO needs to be really bought in on this sort of long-term credibility aspect, because we're not gonna be able to tell you we drove 10 new leads to your website. It's just
Right.
not gonna work that way.
For sure. There's definitely kind of a long game and a lot of uncertainties, right, in terms of who's going to cover it and, ultimately what kind of traffic goals are on the other side of that piece of coverage or whatever. So hard to kind of guarantee certain ROI outcomes. Um, so I might be like blowing this up, but I don't think I am. That AI though is really changing a lot of this, because now we're operating and marketing in a world where these models surface third-party credible content as their proof points ultimately.
Mhm.
And so again, I'm learning about this. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how is AI kind of creating this revival, fueling this revival for PR comms?
Yeah, I think it does make PR more valuable and necessary in many ways. However, I don't know that it changes a lot of the nature of what we're doing. A little bit, but not a lot. Like there are all these firms popping up that are the coin phrase is GEO, like SEO. And I'm
Right.
not necessarily I don't know about that. I'm not sure about that positioning or framing, because I actually think a lot of the core activities are just building a really strong comms program, and we can get into that more later.
Yeah.
But I think GEO somehow implies that we're like gaming the system in the same way that SEO can kind of game the system. And Google made it very transparent initially of like how companies are ranked, and OpenAI, Anthropic, they're not doing that in the same ways.
Right.
Well, so yes, I think it makes our work a lot more valuable, a lot more important, because we are the ones that are working with credible third party news organizations that feed the algorithms. But it's not some. I don't think it's going to be or should be branded as some sort of new, like net new activity necessarily. At least at this.
Mm. Yeah, it's not like, okay, how can we manufacture as many Forbes like references that describe
Yeah.
us exactly how we want to be described? Can
Yeah.
we set a goal for like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Anyone that tells you they've solved that too, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on how to do it successfully, but anyone that claims they've solved how to game the AI algorithms, it's so impossible. There's so many factors, they're so complex, they're so opaque about how they do things. And we'll get into this more later. I mean, there's ways you can figure out some of it, but no one has the full picture at this point.
totally, totally. Yeah, it seems like the LLMs, GPT, Claude, whatever, are trained on this sort of massive text, corpora, much of which comes from these third-party sources, right? Like Forbes, TechCrunch, like name your media outlet, your trade publication. Um, not in a way to necessarily, or not in the spirit of trying to game the algorithm necessarily, but is there a way that you talk to clients about this idea of like feeding the training set,
Yeah.
or ensuring that the positioning is written well into the model rather than be ignored or misrepresented?
Yeah. It's funny because we have clients, they'll do their own searches for their companies on ChatGPT, and they'll be like, "Oh, this
Yeah.
publication is the one we must need to get in because they were referenced this time." And that's not aspects of that are correct, but that's not the full story. So I'm gonna like take a step back and kind of go through
Yeah,
it
please.
can. So okay, so there's the pre-trained model, which is like all the historical data that the AI has. That's only updated when like OpenAI releases a new model. So like I think the most recent one I wrote down for ChatGPT was June 2024. So a while ago. You can't influence that. You can't influence historical information until the new model comes out, and then it's like they're doing another sweep and they're kind of retraining it all. But what you can influence is like the retrieval tool. So when they're looking for like real time information, and a couple of things influence that. If it's something timely, like recency wins, like they really are looking for what is the absolute latest that's been said on a topic. So in some
Mm.
ways, the source matters less, and it's more about like what's most current. But there's one report that I thought was out of all the data and research that's been done on this topic. There's one report from Muckrack that I found the most useful and interesting. What they essentially did is they looked at 1 million citations across different kinds of inquiries to understand what was being cited most often. And they found a couple of things like recency bias, that was definitely one of them. They also found that the kind of inquiry impacted like citations were. So like if you were looking for like a how-to guide, or if you were seeking advice on a topic, or if you're trying to compare two tools, if you're looking for instructions, all of those had a different mix of what the citations looked like, whether it was like more blogs or more like Wikipedia. So that's
Yeah.
one thing to keep in mind. You can't just blanket say like this is going to lead to this kind of source, which I think is what maybe some people assume. And actually, I highly recommend for anyone that wants to go super deep in this, like look at their full report. You just like add your email.
Okay.
And they don't sponsor me or anything. I was just a fan of this
Yeah, yeah.
big
That was
report.
just good
I like
research.
it. Okay, so that's one thing that they found. They also found that overall, the two highest cited content types were corporate blogs and journalism, and that represented like well over half of the pie. So and actually, interestingly, press releases were only 5%, which was really shockingly low in my opinion.
Mm.
So to me, that makes the case of invest in your corporate blogs and invest in journalism and getting third party credible sources to write about you. And when I say credible sources, that doesn't just mean Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Were also looking at like trade publications and smaller outlets. And I think that makes a lot of sense because when you are searching for something on Google, you might search like best CRM system, but no one's typing that into chat or like best at PCRM
Yeah.
PR. But in ChatGPT, you're saying, I run a small PR agency and we need a CRM system that's going to let us track reporters across all of our different clients. I could send them a
Right.
paragraph of what I'm looking for, and they're going to come up with like the most nuanced answer to that Google could never. And so
Right.
to think about like, are you getting to that granular level of detail in your own content and your earned content? That might be a little easier to get into in your own because, it might
Yeah.
correct to find a reporter that's going to write about like the nuances of your CRM system. But,
Right.
so they're you can't, it's not like a one-to-one with Google. And so you can't like treat it in the same way of like, we need to get in this one publication to create this
Yeah.
one outcome.
Well, how do some of the new media channels fit into that? I don't know if Muckrack's data or just anecdotally, just from your experience, but if you get into like, Lenny's podcast, or if
Yeah.
they're appearing on TVPN, or, Alex
Mhm.
Conrad's Substack or whatever, like do those get equal weighting with things like, the Journal or and others?
Yeah, I think 100%. So for one, things that either aren't paywalled or have a soft paywall are going to, and there's some weirdness around this because I know there was like an issue with Perplexity where they were going behind the paywall. So not with
Yes.
that, but I don't know where that really landed. But with OpenAI and Claude, they are not basically they're going from things that are public on the internet. Now that's not to say they're not going to pull from paywalled pieces, but they're only going to be able to see the title and the summary and whatever kind of has been syndicated online. So, there's still value there 100%. But things that aren't paywalled, so if it's a Substack that's open, yes, that will definitely be a great place
Right.
to get coverage. And also, a lot of them, I think, tend to actually go into the nuance a lot more. So they might be even better
Right.
at like feeding the algorithm in a way where if someone's asking a really specific question, you're going to be able to get the right stuff in there. Podcasts are a little bit different. A lot of them I've noticed are fed into the algorithm only because someone posts the listener notes online, like the transcript online. Like there's all these services
Okay.
that are posting the transcript. They're not listening. Like ChatGPT is not able to listen to the podcast and then include that in the results. But
Right.
if the text of it is online or the summary is online, like when I was on Lenny's podcast, if you ask what I talked about, it'll actually give a pretty good answer because he posted really good show notes for it.
Yeah.
So within reason, that's helpful. And totally, yes, I think those count into the, trade and niche category, which is definitely something that's valuable.
I'm smiling because I need to do that. And so I'll make sure for as a new podcaster, we're releasing the transcripts and for that very reason. So that's a good push for anyone thinking on the own
Yeah.
side, which I know we'll talk about.
Well, and there's an
That's
easy way to
important.
do that, like which a lot of companies do. Like take the transcript, have GPT clean it up, and then put it as make a
Oh, yeah.
Substack. Make a Substack where you post every episode. Or
Right.
it's so easy. You could have someone do that in like an hour a week or something, and it's like
Yeah,
ROI is definitely there.
that's awesome. It's been interesting. As you know, was the founder of a startup for a while, and now I'm sort of like sitting back and like trying to catch my breath, watching the craziness that's happening with the AI gold rush or whatever this is.
Yeah.
Um, there's funding, and my perspective, and obviously you're living in this day in and day out, is it feels like there's like funding announcements like every week that like crazy launch videos that are like super well produced, by the way.
Yes.
And I'm curious, like what are reporters actually looking for today? And obviously funding news sounds like
Yep.
is one thing, but when they're trying to decide what stories to cover, or even in a world where like there's like a million funding
Yep.
announcements and stories that they could write, like what are they really looking for?
Yep. So at the end of the day, they care about what's having the most influence. So they're always going to care the most about the open AIs, the Anthropics, like the model Gemini.
Yeah.
That's what they actually care about, frontier models. If you can take your enterprise like AI application or even consumer AI application and somehow make it relevant to what like how it's impacting the models or what the models are doing, reporters actually can be open to those kinds of stories. And so like we had one client that talked about how they like battle tested OpenAI versus Anthropic to decide what they wanted to build on. And that was super interesting to
Oh,
her because it's like, whoa, this is like a customer use case almost. So
yeah.
that's not to say you can't get other kinds of stories, but I really think that's what reporters find the most interesting. They want to know things that are relevant to the large frontier models. And they also like the new, more kind of there's new kind of models popping up or not models, research labs popping up. They love to hear about those. They do
Mhm.
tend to be less interested in the application layer. Like that's not to say that you can't get like funding stories around that. It's just there's so much of that popping up. And they'd much rather
Yes.
hear from like AI researchers at these really interesting, like deep mind started by like former deep mind teams and all of that. Like that's going to be what's always most compelling to them. I think there's a lot of other things that AI applications can do. You can still like do thought leadership and go on the podcast circuit. We have tons of clients that
Yeah.
fit in this category, but it is more of an uphill battle with getting the real serious AI reporters to care about them. So you have to be, I think, a little more creative.
Well, that I think is part of what I want to follow up on. If you're a CMO of a mid-stage company right now or whatever, and you're like, well, I don't have a funding announcement coming up, but we got to get in the game here.
Yeah.
We've got to start redefining um, not how we show up, but how our story's being told.
Yeah.
What's the coaching to the CMO? You referenced like podcast appearances, like newsletters, those types of things. Is that kind of where you would steer?
Are you referring to the CMO of a B2B AI company or non-AI? Because my answer would be very
Are there any left? Are there any B2B non-AI I
let's just
feel
say
bad.
AI.
Is
Let's just
there?
say AI.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So I think the ones that we have most successful or the most success with for B2B AI application companies are ones that have really strong AI spokespeople. So like I'm
Okay.
not talking about just like a CTO that was, I want someone that's like a serious AI researcher, maybe someone with a PhD, maybe
Yeah.
someone that's really in the weeds and can get technical. That makes our job so much easier because it shows that you're actually credibly building and you're not just a GPT wrapper. And I don't know, the
Yeah.
phrase GPT wrapper gets thrown around. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but that's another topic. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. Everything's kind of a GPT wrapper on some level.
Yeah.
You're just kind of fine tuning the models. But yeah, I think if you have a really good spokesperson that can help you get on some pretty solid AI podcasts that aren't necessarily needing to talk to a CEO or founder. So we have a lot of success there. And usually with that individual, we'll dig into like, tell me the challenges of building this product. Tell me, let's get really in the weeds on this. Like, tell me like how you decided what model to build on, like all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part of making this happen? That can be great. Another thing that we have success with, and this can be harder, especially since a lot of these companies are newer, like they want to see tangible business outcomes with AI and like real stuff that you can really show. And if you have a good, like, solid customer name that's willing to talk about how
Yeah.
AI transformed X for X part of their business, we've had like some success with those kinds of stories as well. It needs to be a really good story. So I think there's a lot of people talking about what is possible, but if you can actually show something that happened, I think that's huge. And then the last is like we've also kind of, this is a little meta, but for some clients, we've taken the angle of like op-eds and thought leadership of like how I pivoted from like if it's a company's been around for a while, how I pivoted
Yeah.
from building this MarTech to like, infusing AI into everything we do, or like pivoting to an AI
Yeah.
simple. If you're open to like op-eds, that can be a good topic because it's practical advice for others that are building, which I think is
Totally.
often appreciated.
And it represents probably what the majority of Martech, the industry was doing, is doing, trying to figure out, instead of
Yeah.
something like authentic about being like, hey, here's what we're learning
Exactly. They
on
love
our
behind
journey.
the scenes. Reporters love they're not gonna be not interested in your product a lot of the time, but they will if you have advice, if you have lessons, if you can be useful, that's the stuff that really lands.
Yeah. Getting some good engagement here in the audience. So Danny, thank you for your comments. Is sharing that his experiences. So the newsletters podcasts don't want to be pitched, but with the right idea, they potentially will cover. Is there a pitching to a Lenny to TBPN, or is it like how do you what does that process look like typically?
We do pitch them a lot, but we pitch them in a very different way from how we pitch a traditional reporter. I try to make it seem as casual and conversational as possible. And we have this thing we do at our agency, especially let's say we just started working with a fintech client. They want to go on CFO podcast. We'll just DM a lot of hosts on LinkedIn and kind of see like
Yeah.
if you're open to pitches. And it's a little bit of a numbers game, but it works. That's for more niche though. But I'm a big fan of the LinkedIn DM strategy. That's very tactical, but it works
Awesome.
really well. So it's less sending out a very formal sort of note. But that is I mean, for most of our clients, I think podcasts are probably 50% of what we're doing for them. The,
Oh, really?
the, um, the Lennies of the world, yeah, I mean, we pitch them all the time, but it's so specific and niche of what he's looking for that, like, I think
Right.
I find I mean, I have I don't know, I spent years building a relationship with Lenny and it finally, like, broke through.
Yeah, yeah.
Trying to be, like, so helpful in, like, what I'm sharing with him. I think it's different. Yeah, I think it's maybe you can pitch them, you just have to pitch them in a different way, but, yeah, I think we pitch them all the time. I think there are certain podcasts that are very anti being pitched and some that have even been pretty
Mhm.
vocal on X about not liking PR people. And so if certain clients tell us they want to be on one of those shows, sometimes we'll either try to find an investor of theirs that's been on the show that they can use to foster a
Oh,
lucrative,
cool.
or we'll ask them to cold pitch because it's more likely to be successful if it's coming from the CEO. So I'm big on
Yeah.
like I'm not precious over our relationships. It doesn't need to come from us. Like TVPN said no to one of our clients, and I said, "Hey, let's have the person that wants to be on reach out. It can't hurt." Like,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
That's awesome. And of course, with Lenny's, I'm referencing like one of the top business podcasts, period. So it may be an exception as well in that sense. But, trade podcasts, other like whatever, like chances are, I imagine um, relationships scale, that LinkedIn DMing, right? That's going that extra mile that helps get that
yeah,
pitch.
and relate to the point on relationships. Like, the relationships I have with podcast hosts and reporters, if we're not going to get drinks necessarily and we're not friends, but, like, we have a really
Yeah.
good professional relationship, and I think there's this misconception that, like, PR people are, like, schmoozing reporters and calling in
Yeah.
favors. It's not that. It's that he respects that if I'm going to he knows that if I'm sending him an email, I'm sending him one
Yeah.
that's actually relevant. Like it's going to be something he actually wants to consider. And so it's like building trust with the reporters more so than
Sure.
like pulling in favors with them.
Right. 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 Well, I wanted to. We're talking a lot about podcasts. Actually, is very relevant for this concept of owned media. One, a topic I think still close to my heart. Certainly was for 3 years, and we're just in a funk, us, owned media and I, but we're gonna figure it out. And earned media, which obviously we've been talking about, and my sense is certainly what I was talking about a lot with Audience Plus was that executives are wanting to build their own presence
Yeah.
online, whether it's their LinkedIn kind of posting every day or regularly. We talk about like hosting a podcast like this one, Substack. We kind of chatted about earlier. Essentially, this idea of we're going to go direct to our audience, and you're going to hear from us kind of directly. Um, do you see owned content as part of the sort of modern playbook, and how do you see owned and earned kind of working together so they amplify kind of the net result for the client?
Yeah. Yes, 100%. They're intertwined. They complement each other. I mean, when you launched Audience Plus, you had an incredible owned effort and then also got a TechCrunch article. Like that
Totally.
makes
Yeah, yeah.
they don't I think there's this weird narrative happening right now where they're somehow looked at as it's one or the other. Like you can't do
Yeah.
you're pitted against each other in some ways. And like my agency doesn't do owned. And like but yeah, but I'm not telling you shouldn't do owned. Like we are
Right.
local for a couple of clients. It's not our bread and butter. We were really founded as a media relations firm more than anything else. But I don't know why they have to be pitted against each other in the way that they have been by a lot of people in our
Yeah.
industry. Because and there's also so much overlap. Like, do you even count if you're like the whole concept of going direct? If you're going on
Yeah.
someone else's podcast, it's someone else's podcast, but you're the one talking. Is that going direct? Like, I would
I don't
argue,
think
yeah.
so. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
I would argue yes because I'm talking right now directly to your
That's right. You're talking to the camera. Right.
in
Exactly.
that way, I'm going direct, but then you could also argue it's your podcast. So I'm not like
Right.
that's my point. Is like it's a
Right.
lot of
Totally.
bitter fine. Also, one thing that we found really successful, and it's not something I can't take credit for like the strategy of it, our clients do it on their own. The clients that are very vocal on X in a way that feels authentic and real and smart and thoughtful, we get reporters following them on X, and then we can have our
Yeah.
clients deal with reporters, and it's easier for them to build relationships. And sometimes their tweets are even getting picked up in like, I don't know, Fortune term sheet and newsletters and other things. And
Oh,
so I do think if you can prove yourself on social to have like really interesting, thoughtful takes, that it is like kind of a self-fulfilling thing where reporters are then going to be more interested in you. So and again, like it's not something we've necessarily proactively done for tons of our clients. We've just noticed it from there's like certain founders that's naturally really good at their social presence and like
yeah.
sound,
Yeah. Yeah.
they know what to say, they have strong opinions. And so and yeah, I think we've seen that can definitely make our jobs easier.
Um, I wanted to ask about X. This wasn't something we prepared, so feel free to
Okay.
tell me. I have no opinion on this matter, but I feel like about founders being like good. I'm not saying I'm good, but I feel like over time I've figured out LinkedIn a little bit. I have no idea when it comes to X. I have no like. It feels like a completely different game. I
Yeah.
was wondering, do you see how in whether media relations or just coaching or how execs are should show up on X relative to LinkedIn? Like, just have an opinion there.
Yeah, I think as a B2B business, if you know who your buyer is and your customer is, LinkedIn usually makes a lot more sense because you're able to
Yeah.
do things to target that audience specifically. And obvious, it's a employment work job platform
Right.
and career platform. So yes, I think that makes perfect sense. I think X has a certain communities on it. It has startup founders, AI people. It has reporters. It has investors. So like this
Right.
basically this tech ecosystem, if you're selling a product that needs you to get in front of those audiences, then I think investing in X makes sense. Or like if you decide you want to get on X because you want to get in front of more, you want to build credibility with investors and like reporters, like I think it can make sense from that
Yeah.
standpoint, but it's not as broad in terms of like I don't know, if you're selling to Fortune 500 companies and you need to get in front of their, I don't chief compliance officer, like, why would you go
Yeah.
out to do that? Like, that doesn't
Yeah.
chicken
Fair.
So think about audience. I think we're all just like, there's like clout on X or different. Obviously, there's like all this weirdness now since the platform's changed so much in the couple of years
Right.
and couple of years. But yeah, I don't think it should be a prerequisite for every single company. Like it makes a lot of sense for a company like Ramp to be on X because they're selling to other startups and all the founders they're there.
Right.
So
Fair.
yeah, so I think about it from that point of view.
So I guess if you are a founder though, or if you're an early stage, or if you're a founder pre funding or actively kind of in market, your investors are there. You might want to build your personal brand there. Um, Potentially some talent if you're recruiting in AI, like that's a good place to be. What I've noticed is like even the post format though is different. Like, and I don't have a good
Yeah.
revelation here, but like on LinkedIn, it's like there's awkward line breaks that we have to like figure out how to do. Don't include the link, comment quickly when someone does. There's like a whole game. I haven't figured out the game yet for X, but I know I don't know. I feel like maybe with enough practice, I'll get
Yeah, they're a completely different set of best practices for sure.
yeah. Well, let's get back really quick to owned earned. By the way, I didn't. I was just reading kind of our doc here. Like I even wrote it as earned versus owned. So I've set up this like false choice that I didn't mean to even
Okay, yeah.
in setting it up. But you're right. There is this sort of debate or not debate, but sometimes tension in how much to invest.
Yeah.
And so, what do you say to folks who maybe overinvest on the owned side?
Mhm.
And neglect kind of credibility of third party validation, and especially in again for all the reasons we talked about of why in the AI world that's kind of a or in this future kind of way people are discovering information about
Yeah.
companies and whatnot. That's probably a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there can be it can feel tempting to ignore it because PR is harder and more expensive and more of a long game. So, and I
Yeah.
don't think every listen, I think if you're Series A, like I think it can depend what stage in your growth it makes sense to bring on PR. It doesn't every Series A company doesn't necessarily need to have a PR agency on retainer. I think so if you wait a little bit longer, you're actually going to potentially see higher ROI on your investment because more reporters are going to be interested in you because you are farther along in the business.
Oh, interesting.
So I think there's a conversation to be had on when it makes sense to do PR, for sure. But then once you are at a stage where it can actually be driving value for business, I think. I mean, it just goes back to that stat earlier. Muckrack says about probably like a quarter of sources are earned, and then a quarter are blog posts, and so or earned
Right.
rate and then blog posts. So like you're missing that quarter of the pie if you're not doing any earned media. And so I think, and you're also missing what we talked about at the very beginning of the show, which is just that credibility stamp of approval when
Yeah.
your SDRs are going to email prospects or DM them on LinkedIn. It's the same way, like if I'm pitching a podcast, I like to include a link to something interesting the person has done in the past. Like because
Yeah.
you need more than just your words. So I think from that perspective, you're just leaving more on the table. And then I think, if you're investing really heavily in your owned channels, like think through what that mix looks like and where you're going to see the most value. And so I would
Mhm.
argue, I mean, I guess if you count earned or if you count owned as a press release, like maybe don't do the press release and instead do a blog, invest in some blog growth.
Right.
Think through like what mix is actually going to make the most sense for you. And it might change. You can experiment with that, but there might be areas where you could invest less and then invest more in PR.
It makes a ton of sense. Um, I opened with this when we first started talking. The conviction that I'm starting to get as I'm thinking about, the role of the marketer in this
Mhm.
new world,
Yeah.
or at least in terms of the types of brands that we want to build that are going to ultimately be lasting, are ones that aren't just the fastest or the loudest, even though that's great and you should aim to
Mhm.
grow fast. If Lovable went from what 0 to 100 million of ARR in 8 months or
Oh
something
my
along those
god.
lines. Like that's
I
the new
was
pace car, right? That's what success is now.
yeah.
Um, but beyond that, it's the brands that feel the most authentic or
Yeah.
emotional, or for lack of a better subset, the most human.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you agree with that, but more so even like, can PR comms help companies develop this humanity to the brands that they're expressing online
Yes. In
or
fact,
activate it?
I think without even intentionally doing that, we do that because that's what reporters and podcast hosts and newsletters and that's what they tend to be interested in. So like when we're pitching a company, we usually start by pitching a person, like this great executive
Mhm.
worked here previously. This is all the stuff he believes. This is what makes him compelling. Like we're often, unless we're pitching hardcore product news, we're often leaning into the person that we're pitching, and that
Okay.
usually lands more, or like the background, something unique happened in their experience in the past. So I think, yeah, the human piece is really important, especially when you're a smaller company and your product story
Yeah.
isn't going to necessarily be something that drives top tier coverage, but you might get a quote in the Wall Street Journal because you're an expert in whatever, and
Right.
you are getting that interview because of the way that it was pitched. So I think, yeah, I think authenticity is really important, and like, I mean, that's just like a big like the way that we try to do PR at our agency is like really talking like human beings. Like the way that
Yeah.
is like I try to really make it sound like you're just sending your friend an email, super short, super human language, no marketing fluff. And so that I think really bodes well because there's so many people just sending out boilerplate press releases and like
Yeah.
calling themselves the next gen revolutionary and most innovative, like whatever.
Right.
And they like try to script all that out. And so, yeah, I think authenticity, reporters appreciate it when you get on the phone with them. If they feel like they're getting real talk and not just your product pitch, that's great.
Yeah.
Give them some like dish on how hard it was to build the product and all the issues you had along the way. Like they're much more likely to hit you up later and want to feature you in a future article than if they feel like you're like reading out of, your sales deck.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. Like people, I often say like, people buy from people.
Yeah.
So I imagine like reporters want to hear from people and tell stories of people. And it's not just about bits and bytes or performance, but
Yeah.
the human interest piece is still at the heart of journalism, I imagine.
Yeah, and when you look at who's most successful on X and maybe LinkedIn too, but definitely X, it's like the ones that are like sharing super authentic takes on things and like building in public and like sharing their
Yeah.
actual perspective. It's not, yeah. So I think you see that those are the people that really tend to do well.
Totally. Um, so just one other maybe question on the topic of this humanity bit. I think we've established here that it's not just about PR generally speaking. It's not just about coverage in the old context, in the new context, coverage plus citations for a model to index and rank. It's about trust building. And I'm curious if there's non-obvious ways that CMOs can leverage PR, work with PR across other sub functions. I think we talked a little bit about PR plus content from an owned perspective, or
Yeah.
media engagement, but maybe even events. Or are there any other kind of traditional parts of the marketing mix that could benefit from working with PR comms, to build trust ultimately with
Yeah.
audiences?
Yeah, I guess like one thing I was thinking about with that, yeah, I didn't have an obvious answer to this question, but I was giving it some thought. And I think one thing that came to mind is like how you can work with PR to be useful to your customers. And so one
Mhm.
idea I had there was around like I think data can be something really interesting that is both useful to customers and pitched to media. And it needs to be the right kind of data. Like we're not just looking like this muckrack report actually is a perfect example. I was like
Oh yeah, it's a good
about
one.
how great it was for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's useful, and are we a Muck Rock customer? I don't remember, but anyways, either way,
Yeah,
it was useful to me, and they got press coverage over it. They got a great
nice.
Activist article. In fact, when I was researching the report, I saw all of the news articles they got on it. So that's like a great example. And so not just obvious insights, like real data that can help people do their jobs. Like that report
Yeah.
do my job because now I know to do blog posts over press releases, and now I know that I have a way to communicate to clients the importance of earned
Mhm.
data. So yeah, so data is one way. I'm sure there's other ways to be more useful to like customers by partnering with PR. Like potentially like organizing like dinners or events that bring both to get like bring together
Yeah.
customers and media for like honest conversations around things. And then your customers will be really happy because they're getting in front of all these reporters that they
Totally.
otherwise wouldn't get in front of, using them for press interviews that actually are mutually beneficial. So yeah, I think there's ways that PR can help, like just with the other, like the customer brands, like public image in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are the big ones that come to
That's
mind.
great. Yeah, there was one I was working with a client, I don't know, who knows when, a few months ago. And we did this like field marketing dinner, so to speak, customers, prospects, but the business was really around like the ethos of the company. It was like starting a movement. It was very like thought leadership driven and aspirational. And we didn't intend to have the journal there actually. It's almost a happy accident.
Nice.
But the idea was like almost like an off the record relationship building moment with the journalist. But you know, she got a chance to sort of be at the inside table for this traditional job function that was being completely reinvented for the new era. And I don't actually no longer working with the clients. I'm not sure exactly what happened downstream, but I think what you can believe, a story you can tell yourself, is that might have led to something down the
Yeah.
line, whether that was like, hey, whether that was an explicit article, like I was in the room when the revolution happened or whatever. I'm dressing it up to be this much
Yeah.
bigger deal. Or just downstream when they do raise their next round or
Yeah.
whatever, they'll have that kind of relationship established. But it's good news for the customers too, or the prospects, or the first movers in the industry, because they are, to the extent they want to go on the record, like they are the heroes and the pioneers of something new. So that's a cool, feels like a cool application of earned or PR media relations. I'm not using the right language.
Good.
That works really well.
Yeah, and like the whole, I mean, I really think it's an important point around the relationships you build with reporters really can come back around later and have amazing results. Like we had one client, we got them tons of top tier briefings. No one wrote because they didn't have news. The client was a little
Mm.
frustrated. They ended up pausing because they weren't going to have news for a while. But then when they had an announcement, they got every single top tier reporter wrote about it.
Oh, really?
They brought us back on after because they were like, it worked. Like literally, those were all
Yes.
conversations we had set up for them. And it was actually totally, yeah, when they paused, we knew it was just like there wasn't much time to do PR at that point anyways. But yeah, it totally worked. And so I think sometimes you need to see it to believe it. And now that client is like all for relationship building conversations. So yeah, I think that's great. Not everything's gonna have an instant result.
Totally, totally. Well, Emily, thank you so much for sharing your story. I've learned a lot. How can folks learn more about Six Eastern? Like, what's the best way for folks to follow your story?
Yeah. Yeah, our website's like 2 years out of date, so I won't say go to 6 Eastern. You can go to sixeastern.com if you'd like to see, our case studies from 2 years ago. But,
Nice.
more current, I think on X, actually our 6 Eastern handle, we, post all of our wins on real time that we get for clients, which is kind of
Oh,
fun.
awesome.
And then my personal handle is EA Gerber on X, and I sometimes tweet PR thoughts now and then.
Awesome. I seem to remember, was there like a TikTok thing? Like, I'm
Yes,
thinking of
we
following you guys on TikTok as well.
I'm desperate to revive our TikTok, and we actually,
Yeah.
I tried to play around with doing an AI clone that I could use to share funding news, and I recorded my own clone, and it made me cringe, and I couldn't.
Oh, no.
So I'm still playing with it, but we used to post every funding announcement on TikTok and do like a recap of it, and it was kind of a cool idea because no one else is doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's something I need to revive. I need to see if we have kind of a media star on the team that I can task with doing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And for everyone who joined today, thank you. And we'll look forward to catching up next week. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.